All right, today I'm going to be talking about John Brown, but not just the version you usually hear about in history textbooks. I'm focusing specifically on Webb Du Bois' interpretation of John Brown and how that interpretation changes the way we understand him as a historical figure. Because honestly, when most people hear John Brown, they think one or two things: either a hero or a violent extremist. But Du Bois doesn't really settle for either of those simple labels. Instead, he gives us something way more complex and honestly, way more human. Before we even get into Du Bois, we have to understand the world John Brown was living in. This was a time of extreme tension over slavery in the United States. You've got laws like Missouri's Compromise and Kansas, Nebraska's Act basically trying and failing to keep the country balanced. At the same time, abolitionist movements are growing fast, and the Underground Railroad is becoming more active. So, this isn't just background information, it's pressure. It's the kind of environment where people start asking, is talking enough? Or does something more drastic need to happen? And that question is extremely what's being done in the John Brown steps. Now, Du Bois is very clear about one thing: slavery is not just wrong, it's violent, it's demoralizing, and it completely destroys identity. He describes it as something that doesn't just hurt people physically, it reshapes their entire existence. Families are broken apart, people lose control over their own lives. And because of that, resistance isn't just understandable, it's inevitable. From a psychological standpoint, we could even say that this creates a kind of collective trauma. People aren't just reacting, they're trying to reclaim control, dignity, and identity. So when Du Bois talks about slavery, he's setting up the foundation for why someone like John Brown would feel justified taking action. So now we get into John Brown himself. And this is where Du Bois really flips the narrative. He argues that John Brown was not insane, even though that's how many people at that time described him. Instead of Du Bois present him as someone with clear moral conviction, Brown believed slavery was evil, not complicated, not debatable, just wrong. And more importantly, he didn't just believe it, he acted on it. From a psychological perspective, Brown shows what we might call moral absolutism, a belief system so strong that it overrides fear, social norms, and even self preservation. That's why he comes across as intent. This intense nature is what attributes to his madness. But Du Bois doesn't see that intensity as madness, he sees it as purpose. Now, the most famous moment: Harper Ferry. In 1859, Brown led a raid to seize weapons from a federal armory. His goal was to arm enslaved people and trigger a large uprising. Now, historically, we know that plan fails. He gets captured, tried, and eventually executed. But Du Bois doesn't focus on failure the same way a textbook would. Instead, he focused on what the raid represents. It shows that slavery wasn't stable. It shows the resistance wasn't just theatrical, it was happening. And it proves that Brown was willing to take real risk for what he believed in. Even if the plan didn't work, the message spread. So why does Du Bois respect him so much? It comes down to this. Brown didn't just fight for black people, he worked with them. That's a huge difference. Du Bois emphasizes that Brown actually understood the reality of slavery on a personal level. He wasn't distant. He wasn't observing from outside. He built relationships. He listened. He trusted their voice. And because of that, Du Bois sees him as a rare and for at least for his time, not just morally serious, but genuinely connected to the people he was trying to help. This idea continues here. Du Bois makes it clear that Brown didn't see enslaved people as helpless victims. He saw them as equals, as people capable of resistance, intelligence, and leadership. That perspective matters, especially during a time when society was built on the idea that black people were inferior. Brown challenged that, not just with words, but in action. And Du Bois highlights this because it separates Brown from other abolitionists who may have believed in ending slavery but didn't fully trust black agency. So when we put everything together, Du Bois' main argument is pretty direct. John Brown was not a fanatic. He was a man driven by moral clarity. He wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't acting randomly. He was responding to injustice the way that made sense to him. And Du Bois frames him as someone whose actions came from concise, not chaos. That doesn't mean he was perfect, but it means his actions had meaning. And this is where things get really serious. Du Bois uses John Brown as a warning. He argues that repression, especially racial repression, always leads to violence. He argues that people, when denied freedom, identity, or anything like opportunity, will eventually start to break in a long period of time. He also challenges the idea that inequality is natural or justified. Instead, he argues that true freedom means equal opportunity, not dominance. And then he leaves us with one of the most powerful ideas in the entire text. Open quote, the cost of liberty is less than the price of repression. Close quote. That line hits hard because it still applies today. So to wrap everything up, Du Bois didn't just tell us who John Brown was. He asked us how we choose to interpret him. Is he a hero? Is he dangerous? Or is he something in between? When Du Bois really does is, well, he's pushing us to think about how history gets shaped. Because the way we tell these stories matters. And maybe the real takeaway is this. John Brown wasn't just part of history. He was a part of an ongoing conversation about justice, resistance, and what people are willing to do when they believe something is wrong. This concludes my presentation, and thank you for watching.